What is going on, world, and welcome to yet another edition of Open Run presented to you by War Media. My name is Gabriel Wilkins, and I'm back again beside my co-host, Josh Hicks, as we're currently only a few days away from the NBA draft as we record this at the top of a brand new week. How you doing, man?
Good as always. Always happy to be, with you on the mic and everything. Happy Juneteenth. Shout out to
Can't forget about
our
that.
special holiday.
Yes, indeed.
It's about time, but that's a long story for another
indeed.
day. So, obviously, I'm good, man. I'm glad to have you on, be on the show with you, and let's get this thing rolling.
For sure. In this week's installment of Open Run, Josh and myself will take out the time and opportunity to discuss the latest blockbuster trade to take shape in the NBA over Father's Day weekend, in addition to sharing our thoughts on the league's final verdict regarding Ja Morant's suspension to tip off the 23-24 NBA season to come, among other matters pertaining to the upcoming draft out in Brooklyn this year and more. But before we jump into discussing some of the hottest topics around the league, let's take time, as we always do, to show appreciation to some of the basketball's premier minds and talents to open up the show as part of our Hoop Shout Out segment. Special Hoop Shout Outs go out to WNBA All-Star forward Breanna Stewart of the New York Liberty, who became the first player in the history of the league this past weekend to record at least 200 points, 100 rebounds, and 40 steals through the first 10 games of a season after exploding for 28 points, 14 rebounds to go with 7 assists to guide New York to an 18-point home win over Phoenix in a recent outing. In addition to 15-year NBA vet and former Bulls forward Mike Dunleavy Jr., who was recently promoted as the general manager of the Golden State Warriors after working with the franchise in various roles the last several years prior to the weekend, as Dunleavy Jr. now presides over the front office of the franchise that drafted him with the 3rd pick overall out of Duke back in 2002. So after taking out a short moment to highlight the accomplishments of those within the game, what are some storylines across basketball that stood out to you over the last several days as we stand only a few weeks away from the start of a new league year?
The WNBA is always popping in the summertime, man. And this week we had 2 fireball performances between Arike Ogunbowale and Jewel Lloyd, both dropping over 35 each. I believe Arike had 41. Jewel Lloyd had 39 in the same game. It was a shootout, man. When I saw the highlights, we always talk about how progressive the WNBA has been from a talent perspective. The league's in good hands, man. The league is in good hands. And to be able to see those 2 battle it out, it in representation of the fact that they both wear 24 because of their idols, Kobe Bryant. That means they definitely show what it's like to have that Mamba mentality on the court, especially on the offensive end. They definitely was like, how do you want it? Either way, we give it to you. And it was exciting to see. So shout out to the WNBA for that. And those 2 specifically, the league's in good hands. And with those 2 helping lead the front in franchise marketplaces where they don't have the best talent around them. It really means something. It really means it shows something with the way they're leading their squads so far this year.
Oh, for sure. And it's shaping up to be an interesting race for the scoring title, because I'm looking at the stats as we're talking about this right now. Jewel Lloyd is leading the league in points per game with 25.4 points this season. And Arike is right behind her at 23.5. And when you consider the fact that Dallas is currently 5-6 through their first 11 games of the year, and Seattle's 3-7, and you talk about the lack of talent, that those 2 have besides them on their respective rosters, it's shaping up to be an interesting race for the scoring title, one in which Arike, if I'm not mistaken, has captured a couple times in her career thus far to date. So Jewel Lloyd's giving her a run for her money, and I'm interested to see how that's going to, take shape over the next coming months or so, especially with Breanna Stewart up there in the middle of that, averaging 23.9 points per game, and it's showing no signs of slowing down on a Liberty team that looks like they hell-bent on getting to the finals, besides the Las Vegas Aces, who are red hot, might I add, and a team that's definitely stood out just following the W from afar to start the season. But I know as the year picks up, I'll definitely be keeping a closer eye on them because, man, they got a juggernaut over there. And then we always talk about players such as Asia Wilson, Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, but we never talk about Jackie Young enough.
Yeah.
And she's like the fourth option on the team, but she's holding her own. So I've been impressed with what I've seen from the two juggernauts in New York and Vegas on the WNBA front. Yeah, like you talked about with Jewel Lloyd and Enrique Ongunbuwale, that scoring race between those two with Breonna Stewart in the mix, that's going to be a hell of a ride to watch and to see how it unfolds. But for me, I think what stood out to me is, of course, a trade that we're going to get into after we finish with the opening of this segment with, things that stood out to us. But one thing that really stood out to me is just, this NBA business. It's a lot of stuff going on, man. And I think the agency has taken over the boardroom in NBA front offices.
Mm-hmm.
And if you find a way to connect the dots, God bless you. Because the NBA as we know it is really changing. And if you know, if you don't, you need to get in the know. Because a lot of these moves that are coming, if you really, or even the moves that are coming and the moves that have transpired, if you really know people in this league, it's not even hard to figure out anymore how guys are moving. And I'm amazed by that, especially when I can recall a time in my life where there was certain information that always stayed confidential, but nowadays it's in the light. And what's going on down in the desert, man, it was some things I found out this weekend through Twitter, and after verifying it for myself, I was amazed. I'll just say that.
Yeah, man. Phoenix is cooking something up down there. They're definitely cooking something up down there.
They got a lot going on. And you know what? They got an owner that's willing to spend the money.
Yeah.
And I respect it. I respect it.
Most definitely. I mean, you can't, anytime you got superstars, more than one on your roster, it's put up or shut up. And we've often been, it's too often known that we don't always have the ownership that's willing to put the money where their mouth is when it comes to the talent that they have. But Phoenix is clearly an exception. Matt Ishbia understands the scenarios, the situation, and he's going all in. He's letting it be known, like, I'm going all in, and I'm going to do it my way. And the fact that he's what he's done so far in only 6 months since he's took over that ownership, that new ownership, man, it's something special to see. Got to give props to him.
Oh, for sure. And let's get right into it. Because this past weekend, the Phoenix Suns announced that they're in the midst of finalizing a trade with the Washington Wizards for three-time NBA All-Star guard Bradley Beal to form a big three pairing down in the desert. This was first reported by ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, who we know as Woj, and the trade package is expected to include Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and several second-round picks with a pick swap. The deal is expected to take a few days to complete in an effort to allow Washington more time to field other offers and possibly turn it into a three-team trade to grant CP3 the possibility of landing with a contender. Should no third team emerge, there is a possibility that the Wizards and Paul could set up a contract buyout, making the vet point guard a free agent. I mean, Phoenix with this move just got they got 3 of the top 20 active scorers and points per game career-wise in the league. So it's from a box office standpoint, it's great. I don't know if it makes them a prohibited favorite in the West next season. I don't know. I don't think it does, because I think the West is wide open. And I continue to say that until another team proves it. I know a lot of people want to anoint Denver as the new dynasty. Mm-hmm. Had a great run last year, but every year is different. And in an era where the race for the title is wide open and there's no clear-cut dominant team, I don't think we're in an era where we could just give teams the benefit of the doubt anymore, especially with all that's transpired and other things that we'll get into a little bit later in this show involving some key all-stars in situations in the Western Conference. But I can't knock it. I think Beal gives them another score, and it's a guy. I don't know how you double him. I don't know who you're leaving, So it's interesting, but I hope that other teams in the league don't panic because they see things like this, and I hope that they operate cautiously as opposed to just making a reactionary move based off of what's transpired. But what are your thoughts on this move and how it all unfolded?
It's an interesting move knowing that you have a head coach who's a defensive-minded coach. So because of that, you making this move says two things. You're going to trust Frank Vogel to make this a really good defensive team with 3 all-stars that they can play defense, but it's not their strongest suits. And you're also saying that offensively, you either have assistant coaches on your staff that's ready to that can assist in creating a game plan that fits them, or you saying, "Yo, it's street ball. Let's roll. let's just ball." Because that's what you got on your roster. You got 3 ballers on your team. They don't necessarily have to have plays to function, and that's what makes this scary. Kevin Durant now has created a situation in Phoenix of what he was supposed to have in Brooklyn, and now that has transformed in a more powerful way, man, I like you said, I don't know how you can't guard or double team a lot of those guys. Kevin Durant is still potent in scoring, as we know. Devin Booker is really coming to his own as like the next big thing from a scoring perspective. And then you got Bradley Beal, who's an elevated version of a Zach LaVine. And that's pretty powerful, knowing the versatility that Zach LaVine brings to a team. Bradley Beal could do that and has done it consistently throughout his time in the league. And putting all that together offensively, my biggest worry is they treat this like the Miami Heatles.
No, they can't do that.
I know they can't do that, but that's my biggest fear, because this is what the difference was with the Heatles when they first got there versus how they finished. Your bench is shot. You have no bench. Obviously, I do think they're going to make more moves and use DeAndre Ayton to make those moves, which is genius. But at the same time, I want to see how they replenish that bench, as well as who is this next quote unquote point guard they're going to have now, because they had to get rid of Chris Paul to bring in another sniper. Obviously, I would like to see what those moves are looking like, but yeah, I agree with you. Phoenix is not the prohibitive favorite. It is wide open, but you can't argue that this trade makes their chances that much better.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to figure out. How in the hell did Phoenix manage to retain DeAndre Ayton?
Right.
I understand Bradley Beal has one of the few luxuries that most stars in the modern day era of the NBA do not have. He had a no trade clause, so he could dictate where he wanted to go. And I always believed that he was going to Phoenix for the simple standpoint of this reason that I'm about to state right now. Because everybody don't know this unless you really follow the business of the league. I happened to do an internship about several years ago for a guy who works in the agency that represents Bradley Beal, Priority Sports and Entertainment.
Yep.
You know who Bradley Beal's agent is? Mark Bartelstein. For those who don't know, Mark Bartelstein lives in Deerfield, and his operation with his agency at Priority Sports is based out of the River North neighborhood in Chicago, the same city in which we coming to you now recording this. All right. Moreover, his son, Josh Bartelstein, is the CEO of the Phoenix Suns. The dots were in alignment perfectly. So he had control as to where he wanted to go, but how the Wizards didn't get DeAndre Ayton is amazing to me. And I'm not so sure that the Suns are going to be quick to trade DeAndre Ayton, because you talk about how Frank Vogel is so defensive minded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's one thing that's essential to have in Frank Vogel's system? A big man.
Yep.
Even when he won the championship with the Lakers, he had 2. Matter of fact, 3 with JaVale McGee. He had JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, and of course, Anthony Davis. So when you put all that together, it's like they really got 4 stars, and whoever plays the point guard spot for them is more than likely going to be one of the lower paid players on the team. But then they also got a guy that's from the local area and from Belleville by the name of Jordan Goodwin, who provided quality minutes for Washington on the defensive end of the floor. Nice on-ball defender, spot-up shooter, seemed like a quality role player who, if Phoenix seeks to retain and develop, I think could eventually work his way into that role of being their starting point guard. So it's like, I don't know how Phoenix managed to get a quality role player on top of a star in Beal, and they didn't even have to give up their best player that has reportedly been on the market for the longest to get it done. That's crazy to me, bro.
Yeah, and not even just the fact that you didn't even trade DeAndre Ayton. You didn't even trade any first round picks.
But they don't really have none that they can trade, because remember, they traded 3 of them to Brooklyn to get Kevin Durant. And you can't trade back-to-back picks in consecutive years due to the step-in rule.
Right.
In the NBA. So like, man, but you're right. I mean, Brad Beal didn't have a high price tag to get, but if you watched it, like, you gotta at least seek to get a building block for your future. Someone to sell tickets with.
Right.
And you don't have that now.
No, not at all. But it's also interesting now that this deal has taken place, considering that the recent news that's coming out of Chicago was Zach LaVine being on the market.
I've heard.
Now you're looking at the same, like, okay, if Bradley Beal was cost this much, does Zach equate to that amount on the trade market? It sets a whole new precedence, especially when you talk about max players like that. So it's interesting to see how that's going to work out, especially with the Bulls reportedly, looking for multiple first-round picks in a young player, or a first-round pick, but a high-quality, top-tier all-star player. It's interesting how the market is now going to shift, because at the end of the day, I think this actually lessened the value pool of what Zach already even had to, offer per se in the trade market. It kind of lowered the bar that much more. And it could be good for the Bulls. It may not be good for the Bulls, depending on what happens.
You think the Brad Beal trade lowered the market for the Bulls?
I think it possibly did.
I can't say that for this reason. Zach is the younger talent, and he's under contract for several years. Whereas with Brad Beal, I could see his value being a little bit lower because he's about to turn 30. And even though he's been an all-star 3 times in his career, he's also dealt with some injuries off and on the last few seasons. But and it all depends who's in charge too with these trades, because Brad Beal, like, let's think about it, bro. He operated in good faith with the Wizards. Remember, he signed off on a big time contract extension. And at the time we talked about this last summer, I told you guys, I said, I don't see him playing the rest of his career in Washington. And at some point, I think that him and the Wizards front office will work in good faith with one another. With him having that no trade clause to help him get to a spot in which he wants to go in the pursuit of a championship, or to play alongside of other all-stars of his caliber. And they did that. Zach's situation, I think they could get something. One thing I will say, this Rudy Gobert trade from last summer,
Yeah.
It's changed the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not putting a bunch of picks on the table on top of the star, then it's nothing that you can do to get it. You know, but I think Zach still got a market if they want to go that route. I don't think the Bulls will this year, but at some point I think they will. But Chris Paul, man, he said he found out about the trade on a plane ride to New York as he was getting ready to promote a memoir on Good Morning America at the top of the week. Where do you believe his top landing spots are should he happen to receive a contract buyout in Washington?
I think he's going to. I think he's going to go to either LA teams, but I would love to see him in Milwaukee. I would love to see him in Milwaukee with Giannis. That would be a pretty good, duos, and especially when you can, move Drew Holiday to the 2. He can play point guard, but you can move Drew Holiday to his natural position at the 2 and have Chris Paul run the 1. Man, that'd be pretty impressive. The addition for Milwaukee, and in a lot of ways, I'm not saying he's going to completely replenish, someone like a Malcolm Brogdon who they lost, but he can give them that extra boost in that own way. And with Drew being there, that could provide the stability to work with the Chris Paul and manage minutes, all those things, etc. But I think he's eventually going to go to one of the 2 LA teams, with the Lakers being the top option. I just feel like he's going to play with the king. He's going to try to win a ring with the king. He's going to go to the team he was originally supposed to go to before David Stern jumped in and vetoed the trade. Like, he's going to eventually go to the Lakers. And LA makes the most sense. His home's out there, family's out there, lives out there in the off season. He loves the area. Makes sense. Ron up the street. Yo, come on. Banana boat guy, come through. He already played with almost all the banana boat guys. Might as well add Chris Paul to the list, right? So I think that's what's eventually going to happen. But I think he would do pretty good if he was to go to a team like Milwaukee in the East, where the East is wide open right now, too.
Yeah, I've been saying it for the longest. I think Chris Paul need to go to the East. Milwaukee would make perfect sense. I think the Bucks would try to do all in their power to, acquire him if they could, because he's a guy, when the game get tight in the last 2 to 3 minutes, can serve as the conductor for that offense, setting guys up, taking a lot of pressure off of Giannis to take a lot of marquee shots and clutch moments, and be that calming presence and voice for that Bucks locker room. You put him with Drew Holiday, that could be a nice pairing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a lot of reports that once Drew Holiday's contract is up, that he's considering retirement. So you might want to get a little rental piece if you can, if you're unable to get a guy on the market such as Fred VanVleet to come to Milwaukee. So with the cap space and their salary situation there. So it remains to be seen how they're going to play it. But I'm very interested to see where he goes. I say Milwaukee's one of the top landing spots. I also believe that, like you said, the Clippers and the Lakers are as well. Out the Clippers, though, I wouldn't. I think it would take a lot for him to go back, even though the ownership group has changed. Mm-hmm. But guys like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George seem to have a voice in that front office with Lawrence Frank, to where when they speak on guys highly, they listen. So I will watch that very closely. And it wouldn't surprise me if he did return to the Clippers, especially with the talent that they have beside him on the wing, which they lacked during his time initially with the Lob City era Clippers. So we'll see. But I want to introduce a special guest that we have joining us this week, who's a writer based out of the Chicagoland area, also has had his words featured across Fansided, NBC Sports Chicago, the Action Network, and Bulls.com, among a myriad of other places, and is no stranger to the podcasting space when it comes to hoops, by the name of Michael Walton II. How you doing, bro?
Doing good, man. Doing good. I Appreciate you guys having me on. Sorry that was running a little behind here between work and having a crazy cat and a lot of other stuff. Took me a while to get set up here. So appreciate you guys having me on, man.
Anytime.
What's
Appreciate
up,
you.
Mike?
Nothing much, man. Doing good. Happy to see you outside of the bull season, still thriving. So glad you guys are doing well. And again, I really appreciate it. I've been connecting with Cal for a minute. Cal means about coming on. So appreciate you guys reaching out, man. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, we glad that we finally able to get you on. Just want to ask you your thoughts real quick on something that came out in the NBA world on Father's Day weekend with Brad Beal joining Devin Booker and Kevin Durant out in Phoenix. What's your thoughts on that? And do you think that that move makes the Suns now a prohibitive favorite in the West next year?
Well, I definitely wouldn't say, at least in my opinion, that it makes them a favorite.
Okay.
Obviously, in my work with Caesar Sportsbook, I see how the public are viewing things, and it's going to take a while to actually see anything, but I'm sure people will be very excited at the prospect of another big three, obviously, with one such star power coming together. Personally, I would say, like, if I'm the Denver Nuggets, I'm very much still not worried. And it's just a matter of, it's not even just as simple as they won the championship and I need someone else to knock them off. It's just the fact that right now, the West at least is going through Jokic. Every team starts with, you need a big man who obviously, as we very much see, nobody's going to stop Jokic, but you need someone who's at least going to do a commendable job of slowing him down. And in that case, Minnesota was Gobert and Towns. That's not a team that actually had a chance, but even just having two big bodies like that made things a little bit more interesting for them. In the case of Phoenix, they were one of the few teams to actually give Denver some trouble. I believe they were the only team to take more than one game off of them. So, adding Bradley Beal certainly makes them a bigger threat. My friends call me a Jokic hater all the time because I was one of the guys who assumed once you put him in drop defense against the greatest creators in the game, he's going to have some trouble. And he proved me and all the doubters wrong. Denver's defense was very much able to hold up and perform quite well. KD and Booker went off, but they're going to do that. They were able to do their jobs and keep them down. But overall, I wouldn't worry from Denver because they have the depth to still throw a lot of bodies at these guys. You still have to slow down Jokic, and I don't believe in Ayton really bothering him at all. I do think Phoenix is primed to make another move here. They seem like they're pretty committed to move Ayton to maybe do a 2-for-1 or 1-for-3, try to do a death move to add some more pieces there. But ultimately, I think unless they do something dramatically different at the center position or otherwise, I'm still leaning Denver as the favorite into the West until I see it. But I will be honest, talking to my buddies earlier in the group chat, I did say with the addition of Bradley Beal, if it's a Denver-Phoenix conference finals, I do think that's a 7-game series either way. It's just I'm still picking Denver, assuming they're having home court advantage, just because it's hard to beat them up there.
And of course, if they're healthy, because we know Jamal Murray is such a big, vital part to the success that they've had when it comes to making deep playoff runs. I mean, you look at their record when he's been in the mix in the postseason dating back to the bubble versus when he's not, they go a lot further with him. And he was a huge X factor, as well as their role players, I think, as well, such as, me and Josh talked about last week with Bruce Brown, Michael Porter Jr., and Aaron Gordons of the world and so forth. So I understand what you're saying. I don't think that they're a prohibitive favorite either, but at the same time, I think they definitely caught a lot of people's attention. And now it's going to be very tough to determine and decipher how to game plan for these guys when you can't really double team them when they all on the floor together. And then you got to make a choice on who you're going to leave to take the open shots as well when they're generating them off of driving kicks, depending on who their point guard is as well, who we really don't know about at this point, but either one of those three can take point guard duty if need be and create for guys on the team as well as the other stars alongside of them.
Yeah, Gav, you hit on a few points that are really big there, especially just with there's two sides of it. People are, one, overblowing and overthinking the Phoenix thing a little bit, I would say, on one side of it. And then they're also forgetting that basketball is obviously two ways. And just what I mean by that is, one, obviously, the Suns didn't have a lot of depth before this trade. The trade that killed their depth had nothing to do with Bradley Beal. That was as soon as you make the move to trade for Kevin Durant and you give up great two-way versatile wings like Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges. But obviously, you take the chance to get Kevin Durant every time, but that's what killed their depth. And guys like Torrey Craig stepped up and played admirably for them and sort of gave them at least a few options in the playoffs from the bench. But when you look at this, they gave up Chris Paul essentially for Bradley Beal is what it boils down to. And I understand that, yes, it would be nice if they had a traditional playmaker, whether they start Bradley Beal at the point or they bring Cam, they start Cam Payne at the one, it doesn't really matter with that firepower. That person's just a placeholder, but I think you just go Beal or Booker at the point guard spot. I'm not sure why people are so doubting Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, or Kevin Durant being able to be the lead playmaker for a full season. I get that they're obviously not a traditional point guard, but it's nothing in their careers that indicate any of these guys can't handle that. Just in fact, last year, Bradley Beal averaged over 5 assists a game. So don't really think it's something they'll need to worry about in that department. But the defense, I'm not going to act like the defense won't be a problem. It will be a problem along with health. You need those three guys healthy come playoff time. But the part people aren't mentioning is just to wrap the Phoenix point up here. You brought up Jamal Murray. He is obviously honestly the X factor, maybe the true key to stopping that team because Jokic is going to do his thing. If Murray goes off, you're pretty much done because everyone else always contributes 10 to 12 points. In the case of the Suns here, I think obviously the defense is going to struggle no matter what. They're making the bet they're going to outscore you in a postseason setting, which is very much possible. As we saw, they were almost able to do that to Denver with just KD and Booker. So, Jamal Murray, I'm not even remembering off the top of my head who he had to check when you have KD and Booker on the court, but I'm sure they were hiding him on Josh Okogie, for instance, or, even just putting him on Chris Paul and saying, what is Chris Paul going to do? He's not going to get 30-point games anymore. That's not what he's doing at this stage of his career. When it comes playoff time, you're not going to be able to say, let's stick Jamal Murray on Bradley Beal, it'll be fine. Jamal Murray can't guard Bradley Beal. Obviously, I can't act like the Bradley Beal is going to do well on the other side, but it will take a lot of energy. And if Jamal Murray's getting tired from chasing Beal around screens or dealing with him in isolation or pick and roll attack, same with Jokic. They'll be able to handle it, but just having another guy who's that good in high leverage situations is going to put a lot more strain on their defense. And it's going to give Phoenix a chance because I think people are also forgetting they have Frank Vogel, a brand new coach who, while even though I do think they need to make a trade, I will admit if they keep Aiden with Vogel, I do think there's a small chance he takes an even bigger step forward on defense, which would obviously be very beneficial for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Me and Josh were talking about that prior to you hopping on with us, Michael, about how Frank Vogel is such a defensive-minded head coach and how big men play such a vital role in his systems, going back to L.A. with JaVale McGee, AD and Dwight Howard, and then even back to Indiana with Roy Hibbert and David West. He always has kept defensive anchors in the paint for him. So, and when he has had them, he's had some levels of success with them where he's at least going to the conference finals, if not the NBA finals, as you saw him do in LA, where he won his championship with LeBron James. But before we move on from all the Phoenix talk, I just want to ask you, as I asked Josh earlier, about top landing spots for Chris Paul. Should he receive a contract buyout in Washington? Josh said a team like the Milwaukee Bucks would make for a perfect destination for Chris Paul in his game. He also talked about the Clippers and the Lakers, who are also two teams on the West Coast in dire need of a point guard. What other teams, if not those three, do you see being a nice landing spot for Chris Paul?
Well, it's tough with Chris Paul at this stage of his career. If it's a trade, that limits your options a lot more. Assuming if he's bought out, that opens things up obviously a lot. I would say we all know at this point in his career, at this stage, Chris Paul is going to be looking for somewhere where he can win a championship, which is, as I joked with Bulls fans on Twitter, no need to really worry about Chris Paul at all unless he just out of left field says, hey, Chicago's actually really cool. But the Billy Donovan connection is great. I make jokes about it with every point guard who's a veteran, a free agent, but no need to think about him in Chicago. But to answer your question here, there's a few wild card spots and then the usual ones you said. So I guess just to keep it interesting, I'll just start with the ones you didn't mention. I would say San Antonio is not somewhere I think he would consider at all, just because, again, as I said, he's looking for a championship. But let's just say Chris Paul decides, hey, if someone out of nowhere just decides they want to give me a lot of money at this age for like a 1-year deal or, 2-year deal with the team option, I'll take it. Not sure if San Antonio will want to do it, but you have Greg Popovich, you have Chris Paul. Couldn't think of two better people to help break Victor Wembanyama into the NBA. So that would be interesting. I say that for a lot of veteran point guards. Just San Antonio has the money to spend. New CBA that takes effect, I believe, next year is going to encourage those teams to spend money. So it's something to look out for. Before I get to the Bucks, I just want to say I'm very jealous of Josh. The Bucks were something I talked to my friends about. That a lot of people weren't mentioning them, but before I get to the other teams you already mentioned, just those real quick. Bucks are a perfect spot because I believe Drew Holiday is overtaxed at the 1. Excellent defender, first team all defense caliber guy. He can score in spurts, but when you're asking him to do it a lot and create for others, it's just too much, I think, especially in the playoff setting. So even if you start Chris Paul, bring him off the bench, just having someone to slide Drew Holiday up to the 2 and then Chris Middleton to the 3 and just play as a very big lineup, even if you were to lose Brook Lopez, I think that could be quite beneficial to them. But just back to the teams you guys did mention, Golden State has been mentioned. I feel like people are mentioning them as if they're a possibility for a trade, which I just don't see that materializing in any way. But if he was to be bought out, I don't see any reason Golden State wouldn't do it. You could get him on a vet minimum. They've already spent tons of money in there in cap hell, I think, right now, regardless. And I don't see Chris Paul wanting to do it, but if he wanted to do it and Steph Curry signed off on it, you're getting Draymond back. You're probably going to have to overpay for Draymond either way if you're the Warriors. So bringing in Chris Paul on a cheap contract isn't the worst idea to try to extend your title window a little bit. The last team I'll just mention here that you guys didn't mention is, I can't believe I'm saying this, and again, it has 0 chance of happening, but the Memphis Grizzlies, pretty obvious. They have Tyus Jones, who I'm a huge Duke fan, always have been, so I know a lot about Tyus. He can handle the starting point guard more than capably, is very good, has done it in large spurts already with their injuries and situation up there. But I just think same situation. This is a place where Chris Paul can come off the bench. He can be inactive if he wants. Memphis is so good and so deep. It really would be up to him how much he wants to play. But really the point would be, in case Memphis is getting in some trouble, you have the perfect break the glass in case of emergency in Chris Paul, who can steer the ship a little bit until Ja Morant gets back from his suspension there. So I think the Grizzlies would be a sneaky team that wouldn't be interested, but if both parties for some reason were talking about it, they would be great. But to put a bow on it, from my perspective here, the perfect team, I think, is the Lakers. The Clippers reports have been pretty strong, so I feel like both LA teams are very much in play. All NBA superstars love living in LA, especially the vets. So either one of those teams, Clippers reunion would be cool, but I think it just has to be the Lakers at this point. I don't see why it wouldn't be. We obviously, if you're a longtime NBA fan, you know about the Lakers trading for Chris Paul that was famously denied and didn't go through. So this has been a long time coming, Chris Paul playing for the Lakers, and of course, Chris Paul playing with LeBron James, one of his longtime friends who we know their entire career, Melo, Wade, they've all been waiting in some way to do it. And, these are the guys that are left at this point. So I very much see Chris Paul signing with the Lakers. I don't know the length of it, but they are another team that has a lot of cap stuff that's tough. They're going to have to sign Austin Reeves to a lot of money. So getting Chris Paul on a cheap deal is the perfect way to just add a great point guard for them. And Anthony Davis is a monster. You give him any above average playmaker and he's going to score a lot and thrive. So I think the Lakers are ultimately where he's going to end up. And I think it's the smart call because they're another team that also gave Denver some trouble. Even though I know people are going to say, what are you talking about? They were swept. You have to watch the games. If you watch the games,
sure,
the Lakers were right in it and they were not scared of the Nuggets at all. They just got their butts kicked over 4 games. But in every game, they did put up a big fight. And I think Chris Paul would sort of give them a better chance to put up a fight as well.
Yeah, he would be the less expensive option over Fred VanVleet for sure. And I'm glad that you brought up the Memphis Grizzlies and Tyus Jones, a guy that's been in trade rumors and one of the top guys in assist to turnover ratio year in, year out in the league, because it was some news that just came out of Memphis recently involving Ja Morant, who has been suspended for 25 games to start the 23-24 NBA season following his Instagram live video from last month brandishing guns. It was announced by Adam Silver following the NBA Finals, just as he promised he would do when he had his press conference during the early days of the NBA Finals out in Denver. Want to ask you guys first. I start with you real quick, Josh, and then let Mike have the floor. What was your instant reaction to hearing that news? I thought it went exactly how it would go. I didn't see him getting any more than 25. I think he got the suspension that he was more likely going to get. But what's your reaction, Josh?
Same here. I mean, I have to be cognizant of the fact that Adam Silver is not David Stern. And David Stern probably would have been a little bit more literally stern on this and gave him a much more significant suspension. But considering the fact that, yes, he has been, quote unquote, spiraling out of control when it comes to, guns and videos, etc. Even though he's gone through, gone through more than one investigation regarding the situation of a gun or violent behavior, they both came back negative. He was not charged with anything. Cases were dropped. So because there's no actual validity to a point where he had to pay fines or pay time or suspensions, whatever the case would be, for those incidents, nothing really came out of those. So it wouldn't be warranted to do more than that type of timeline from a suspension perspective. But the wrong was still wrong, and I think this is a good way for Ja Morant to use this to actually get the help he needs and not be gone for more than a week. Like, actually go in there, get through the development process, grow, get the help that he needs to better himself. Because if he doesn't, and things do get worse, you're going to see a much harsher suspension that may equate to a whole year of suspension. And that's something that, Adam Silver doesn't want to do, but if it's necessary, he will put his foot down and do it. So Ja Morant should take advantage of this opportunity, knowing that he can still bounce back from his career with this and really get his head on straight with how to handle and better be more mature in handling those type of situations moving forward. So that way it doesn't go a lot worse than what it could have been.
Yeah, and he issued a statement, vowing to be better and learning from it. Nike also issued a statement on his behalf saying that they're going to stand by him and back him through the process as well, even though I think it's safe to say at this point that he's definitely walking a tight line after this being the second offense with the league, in spite of only getting a 25-game suspension. And for those who say, well, why did he get less than Gilbert Arenas? Well, he didn't have a gun in the locker room. Let's just make sure we clear on that. But I asked you, what was your initial thoughts on it, Michael, after getting the notification that Ja Morant will indeed be suspended for 25 games to start next year?
Yeah, my initial thought was definitely not shocked at all. I think I can even look at some point. I know on Twitter, one of my friends had asked me, in my opinion, what did I think Ja was going to get? And I was like, just when the commissioner really doesn't know, it's a public relations league. It's about optics. It's not really often about what actually happened. Unfortunately, it's just about how things appear, how people react to them emotionally, especially online nowadays. So obviously, I wouldn't make light of it. What Ja did was very dumb, and especially after this being the second warning, after you've already talked to the commissioner about this, had a sit-down interview with Jalen Rose on ESPN about how he learned a lot after going to a rehab camp. It's all embarrassing from his perspective, and I know he knows that, and I'm sure his father and many people in his camp have talked to him because it's just an embarrassing look. And, specifically after Nike, trying to move on from a lot of other, bad stuff that was going on image-wise without getting into that. Here's Ja Morant, a young player who most young kids absolutely love and want to put on a pedestal. And you have this going on. And I think it's just a case of someone being young. Ja Morant understands he's a superstar. He doesn't understand how much influence he has. Just a quick random nugget here. I think it was the Ryan Russillo podcast. Russillo said something about being in Chicago and like going downtown on Michigan Ave and going into like the Nike store and asking them like, how are the Ja Morant shoes selling? Like, are people in Chicago actually buying them? And the guy said the shoes were sold out. You can't get one. People are buying up the whole stock. Ja Morant's popularity with actual grassroots, basketball fans, kids, people, younger people, hasn't really taken a hit, I don't think, much of at all. And I don't think he understands that's precisely the issue with Adam Silver. You can be popular and kids can love you. And you have to understand, even if you don't want to be, you are someone that these kids look up to and in many cases emulate and try to copy. And if you can't draw the obvious line from, they want to be like you on the court and they also want to be like you off the court, it should be something where he obviously can understand the influence he has. But again, the league has changed a lot. A lot of people have said they should learn from their predecessors here. But as we say with every new CBA, their predecessors didn't have this type of money. And we're always going to be able to say that every 5 to 10 years. So
exactly.
It's a whole new ball game. But I think Ja will learn. At this point, 25 games, the NBA Players Association, I think, spoke out saying they thought it was too long and they were going to try to fight for him. In my opinion, I kind of agree. I don't fight for it because it's not a big deal. When someone does something stupid, I'm not going to go to bat to defend them. I initially thought it would be a 15-game suspension just because 15 games just felt like you should learn your lesson. But 25 games is a lot. And I honestly think it was a lot more than most people would expect. And I think it was to sort of get his attention. It's interesting, though, when the NBA goes this hard with the first suspension for him, it does make you think what would be to happen if he was to do something again, if there was a third offense. I'm sure Ja Morant has thought about that. I'm sure the NBA, while they say they have thought about that, I don't think they've thought about that because they think this 25-game suspension should get the message across. But I would just hope for Ja's sake that it does, because once you go to a 25-game suspension right off the bat, there's not a lot of wiggle room for you if you make another mistake.
Yeah, that's well said. And he stands to lose anywhere between, I believe, to like $7.5 to $10 million with being suspended through the first 25 games without pay. And the only thing I would like to see from the NBA is like some form of suspension committee that's formed, because I don't think all offenses are equal in their eyes. And I need to know why that is, because the thing that I find kind of interesting is he only got, even though he got lesser games than what Miles Bridges got for the domestic violence incident, like 30, Miles Bridges got 30, Ja Morant got 25. Like, what are we saying with that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just have a lot of questions. And I think the NBA needs to be very careful of what they say with these suspensions, because you may have some guys that look at that and say, well, what can I get away with and what can't I get away with if I am going to do some reckless stuff? Not saying that you should. And especially after seeing Ja Morant's situation, I think that should be a lesson to a lot of guys. And I love Ja Morant personally. I know he's a big influence on the youth and whatnot, but I don't blame the NBPA for standing up for him. But at the same time, I do agree with you, Michael. I don't think you can really fully fight a suspension, knowing that what he did caused so much backlash, not only from a social media standpoint, but to the organization in which he represents in the Memphis Grizzlies. And once you're a superstar in the league and an all-star, might I add, an all-NBA talent with your own signature line with the swoosh brand, it's going to create a lot of spotlight and attention on you. And you have to know how to be a professional and conduct business in that realm in order to get your money.
Yeah, and I think just another thing, and exactly what you said, you got to be careful with that type of stuff, because you do open yourself up to those type of questions when you come down heavy-handed on the first suspension. I guess, I'm not sure, this is just like me sort of talking out loud here, because I'm not sure if there's a way to stop it from being necessarily the way you do it. But every suspension, especially in the NBA, is always sort of based off of prior situations that they can sort of try to relate. And I don't know that for sure, but it just feels like that, just because Gilbert Arenas, I believe, when he violated the gun policy, I'm not sure if it was more than one, so the original suspension, but I remember 50 games being a number.
It was 50. It
50
was
games,
50.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like, you talked about the committee, which the actual committee for now, at least we know, is the commissioner, at least the other people in the NBA front office. They definitely, I feel like, sat around, you say, reasonably, Gilbert Arenas was suspended 50. What Ja did isn't as bad, let's just say, for instance, so cut that in half to 25. While I would get the logic, I think it's just taking a lot of context out of the situation, as we sort of talked about. Ja Morant sort of being nowhere near, that I know of at least, the Grizzlies facility, being with his own friends, wherever he was. It's just more about the fact that obviously he did this on a public social media forum, embarrassing himself and his organization. I can't get into it too much because I don't know enough about the gun and everything to say the dangerous situation. Obviously, a real gun, you're posing a threat to yourself and other people if you're joking around with it. But it's just one of those things where I feel like they obviously were using a past situation to sort of set the benchmark here. And I think in the social media age we live in, especially with these younger athletes, I think it's better to go lighter on the suspensions. One, to give yourself room to say, hey, if Ja does something again, we're adding 10 games. Now it's 25 games. And if you do something again, we're adding 10 more. So maybe that's not realistic, but it gives yourself some wiggle room to add additional punishment, so to speak. And then the second thing is we need to focus more on, as you sort of mentioned there, Gav, actually helping these guys, giving them some sort of counseling. I'm not sure whether it was the league or his agent mandated him to go like to the Florida counseling thing. It was like a 72-hour ordeal or whatever, but I can't speak on it. It obviously seemed like that didn't help or was not real, whatever the situation was there. So it's like, we're at the point where like, you don't even need any fancy counseling, man. Sit down with your dad and your family and your kids and just chill out and, talk about life. Let's get real for a second. You're a millionaire athlete. There are definitely more important things to do than flashing a gun on Instagram for really no one. So yeah.
I agree. Definitely got to stay off the gram for sure. Definitely got to stay off the gram. Me and Josh have talked about that many times when discussing the Ja Morant situation, which has been a hot topic over the last several months, dating back to when he first got suspended and coming back into the light over a month ago, after he said he was going to vow to be better following the first round loss to the Lakers in the playoffs this year. So it remains to be seen. But I want to move away from the matters around the league to the big topic that's going to be on many people's minds this week, and that's the NBA draft. You had the Charlotte Hornets. They were expected to conduct the second round of workouts and interviews with draft prospects Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson in front of spectators that were said to have included outgoing majority owner Michael Jordan, who recently sold the Hornets for $3 billion and is expected to take a minority ownership seat in the wake of that sale once it's officially finalized. Who do you guys believe that the Hornets should select with the number 2 overall pick? I start with you, Michael, because I know me and Josh had this conversation a couple weeks ago after the draft lottery. He said Brandon Miller. I still want to see if he feels that way, but before I ask Josh, I ask you, who would you go with between Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson?
So first I just want to start with something that my homies are sort of always saying. I hate to be the caveat guy because I always am. Are we including if they like trade the pick here, or is this just straight up the team making the pick?
No, the team making a pick. Like if it was the Charlotte Hornets, knowing what you know about the Hornets and the makeup of their roster, who do you think would be better suited to be in that position? I know it's been a lot of rumors and reports that they could potentially trade that pick. It is no secret, it's been some names linked to him, such as Zion and whatnot. But if they were to keep it in number 2, who would you go with between those two?
Okay, well, just to touch on, even though I know we're not talking about it, as I've said to my friends and anybody I can get with an earshot, trading Zion Williamson, I don't care. We definitely won't talk about it, but I don't care what he does off the court as long as it's not breaking the law. I am not trading Zion Williamson. I could not sleep with giving him up and watching him possibly thrive on another team. Health is literally, I think, the only thing that stops Zion from being like a top, 2015 player in this league. If he stays on the court, he's been dominant. So if I'm Charlotte or Portland and in any way, shape, or form, New Orleans is serious about trading Zion from the pick, it's gone. We don't even have to negotiate. You can have it. It's done. Give me Zion. But moving on to what you actually asked here. If I'm Charlotte, I'm taking Scoot Henderson. I've been a little bit of a hater at times on Twitter, joking about the Bulls trading for Scoot, just because Scoot isn't, the one weakness I will say that people talk about in Scoot Henderson is obviously the three-point shooting. He's a guy who, much like a prime Derrick Rose, is a monster slasher, athletic finisher, playmaker, creator who could rebound super well for a 6'2" guard. So the question is, can he actually hit an open three-point shot, a contested three-point shot? can he, which is especially important in today's NBA, can he get in the pick and roll behind the 3-point line and hit that pull-up three like Dame Lillard does? Because that becomes pretty much a primary weapon in like a playoff setting. I'm not sure if he can answer all those questions, but from what I've seen of Scoot Henderson, whether or not he's a shooter, he's such a dominant athlete and such a young player. Having him on that rookie deal in today's NBA with the way the CBA is about to change, if you can get a player like Scoot on that rookie deal, I just think guys like him, there's a high chance they're going to hit and turn into an all-star caliber player in that second year, third year, fourth year. And, if you're a team that's serious about being good, you sign a few veterans and you have a rookie who's becoming a near all-star and he's making, $9, 10, $11 million a year. That's how you start the building blocks to being a really good playoff contender. So if I'm Charlotte, I'm taking Scoot because the main question I think people have is the fit. And I'm not really worried about the fit.
I'm glad you answered that because I was about to ask you that one.
Yeah, LaMelo, I don't want to misspeak here, so I just want to make sure. LaMelo is like 6'7" listed. So he's obviously not someone you want guarding, really anyone. LaMelo is not a great defender, but at 6'7", there's some positional versatility where you can have LaMelo guard the point guard, you can have him guard the 2, you can have him guard the 3 if it's not a good 3. You're playing a team like Miami where the 3 is Caleb Martin or Max Strus, somewhere where you're not worried about them burning you as much one-on-one. You can find ways to configure it, but at the end of the day, you just really are probably going to put LaMelo on the weakest player on the court offensively, which will probably be just like a random point guard on a random night. But my main issue is, let's just say you go that way and you put LaMelo on point guards. Scoot is extremely strong. He's 6'2", but his strength, I don't know any way of literally testing it, but just seeing him hold up in switches against bigger players for a little bit of time, I think Scoot's strong enough to guard guys who are 6'4", 6'5", even 6'6" at the 2 guard spot. Like when you're talking about Scoot Henderson being able to guard a Zach LaVine. Obviously, he's not locking him down, but just because Zach has some height on Scoot Henderson, I don't think it's going to be an easy task with how fast and strong Scoot is. So if I'm Charlotte, I'm taking Scoot because he's strong enough to give you effort on defense. They were a terrible defensive team anyway, so I don't think adding one more guy who isn't great at it is necessarily going to kill them. And Scoot gives effort, so you need your leaders to sort of be trying on defense because it at least makes everyone else pick up anyway. And just my main point here is if you want to play a fast up-tempo style, which they do, I think Scoot and LaMelo would be dominant just because once they get out in transition, I just don't think you're stopping those two between the pull-up threes and creativity of LaMelo and a passer. And Scoot is a guy who's a great passer, but also is a monster finisher as an alley-oop guy because, again, he has incredible athleticism. So I would take it from Charlotte. But the great thing about this that I think people forget, you can take Scoot, and let's say you give it half a season and you really don't like the way Scoot and LaMelo look together, you're ready to commit LaMelo a max contract. I don't think there's anything that stops you from moving Scoot at some point, if you get to that point. And I don't think Scoot Henderson's value is going to be any lower a year or two from now, because once we see how good he is, at that point, you'll probably get more for him. So I think even if you don't believe in the fit, you take him because he has the most trade value later on.
I like that. That's an interesting analysis and perspective that you have on that, Michael. What you think, Josh? I know last time we spoke on it, you said Brandon Miller. I agree with you personally, but I don't knock the Scoot fit. My only thing is if you put those two together, somebody's got to be willing to play off the ball. I know LaMelo can because LaMelo's a hell of a spot-up shooter and catch-and-shoot guy from three-point land. But LaMelo's so gifted and versatile as a playmaker and used to playing with that rock in his hand in Charlotte that I don't know if he'll be willing to just move off the ball right away. If he was, though, and you have a guy like Mark Williams on that back line that could be a nice pick and roll weapon with either one of those guys handling the rock, yeah, it could get very interesting and scary in the Queen City. But would you still go with Brandon Miller as we on the eve of the draft, Josh?
Yeah, I probably will. Obviously, Mike gives a heck of a take as far as why you should get Scoot Henderson. Most definitely, and I'm not knocking that at all. It's very valid points. But we also, when you're in situations like that, you have to figure out, like you said, who's going to be the future of that team for the most part. I think if Scoot goes in there, Scoot can take it. That's me personally. I think Scoot can take it because he's so dynamic, and all around the team. And for the most part, LaMelo, even though he is a great shooter and everything, there are some limitations, especially when you include health in the mix. So I think if you were to get Scoot Henderson, you're setting yourself up for, potentially a dynamic backcourt. But if you really choose Scoot over LaMelo, you can have a chance to get rid of LaMelo. Especially if you don't see him or see yourself trying to sign him to that extension. So the Charlotte Hornets have to figure out who's going to be the face of that franchise. That being said, if they are so committed to LaMelo Ball, your best option is to give him a wing player, to me, that is the dynamic offensively, to help speed this process along. And especially since you made it pretty much have a guarantee that Miles Bridges is not going to come back. Brandon Miller is a more upgraded version of that. And he does have a defensive presence amongst the perimeter. You having a triangle offense between LaMelo, Brandon Miller, and, like you mentioned, Mark Williams, that's a pretty nice combination that is going to be tough to beat. Now, you put Scoot in there, it's going to be no different from that perspective. But I think you're talking about from a better variety perspective and versatility when you talk about the fact that Charlotte has always had a decent point guard, especially when Kemba Walker came through. They never had wing players that's dynamic as Brandon Miller coming in to play consistently and give their point guards a boost on the offensive end like that. I think Brandon Miller is just the guy to do it. And currently right now, because of the fact they have a top 2 pick like that, I don't know if you're going to get in a league where it's being more driven on the wing perspective. You need a point guard for sure, but to really take your game to the next level, you need that wing player that's going to add to what the point guard as well as the center is going to do. Brandon Miller just seems like that guy for me, especially when you talk about what Charlotte's current situation is and trying to boost and do better than what they have already had previously done.
I agree. And plus, he's a two-way player who can impact the game on both ends. Not to say that Scoot Henderson is not, but because I've thought about the pairing with Scoot and LaMelo. It would be a track meet. I know that they would definitely be one of the league leaders in pace, and they definitely could easily have a top 15 offense if you supply them with some capable shooters and you get a wing over there that's defensive minded and can knock down, catch and shoot looks alongside of Mark Williams, who I believe is only going to continue to grow in this league and get better, because just looking at the impact that he had on their defense when they started giving him minutes with Steve Clifford, he was impressive down the stretch towards the dog days of the year. I know a lot of people didn't catch those games, but if you did, Mark Williams was a solid addition to that roster and showed that he really wasn't no G League guy like they had him in early during the season with Greensboro. But I want to ask Josh, if they were to go in the direction with Scoot, I know Michael says he believes that pairing could work. Do you believe that pairing could work?
I think it can, but for how long? That's the biggest thing for me, because when you tell me, like you mentioned, obviously earlier, the importance of LaMelo Ball having to be willing to play off the ball and thrive off the ball consistently for this to work. When you talk about Scoot and LaMelo together, I honestly start thinking about Kyrie and Luka together. We talk about a backcourt where they have a chance to really thrive and go crazy together, but are they both going to be willing to play off the ball and know that down the stretch, whose balls is going to be in that person's hands? Who do they know who that person is going to be, and do they trust that for the long term? I just don't see that happening in Charlotte. If you were to put those 2 and 2 together, because both are capable, and LaMelo Ball is so gifted when he does have the ball. I just can't see him giving that up so easily. I'm not against it. I do think the pairing can definitely work, but it's going to be a lot of sacrificing being made in that backcourt for the both to thrive at the same time for the long term. And I don't know if that is going to be a valuable case in Charlotte right now.
Yeah, I agree. And then you got to think, with those two guys being so young and wanting to show and prove their worth, it's going to take a huge deal of sacrifice for someone to say, hey, I'm willing to come off of the ball in order to let you operate and get me set up in an action or whatever. And I think that guy would honestly have to be LaMelo.
Mhm.
And it would show some impressive maturity if he was able to do that should they decide to go in that direction. But I want to ask you guys real quick. We know about Victor Wembanyama. We know that he's more than likely going to be the number 1 overall pick holding up a San Antonio Spurs jersey, barring some unforeseen news coming out in the next 72 to 96 hours. But outside of Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller, the prospects that we have talked about a lot in this year's draft class, who are some prospects that fans should have their eyes on next season outside of them? I'll start with you on it, Josh.
For me, it's Amen Thompson. That dude's versatility is pretty impeccable. When you talk about him being, I believe it's 6'7", 6'8" point guard, being able to have the versatility in the fast break. But what gets me is that his versatility on defensive end as well. He can do it all. And at the combine, when you really think about it, there's rumors about hearing that the comparison to this guy is like a younger LeBron James. And when you think about that and how far LeBron has come when it comes to his success in the league, whoever gets Amen Thompson, I don't think he will obviously be that high of a caliber player from an overall offensive winning perspective. But he can when you plug him in, he can do everything. And he can do it at a good enough rate to where your team can stay afloat. And at times, if you put the right pieces around him, can really thrive as he continues to grow. So he's not getting as much love as other prospects that we just mentioned, but he's going to be a top 5. I think he'll be a top 5 pick in this draft. And with him being top 5, he's going to have a chance to really show based on if he's put in the right situation, I think he could really thrive. So that's one for sure major prospect for me that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to see where he goes on draft night.
On my end, I know I haven't gotten into the draft as much as I usually do this year, just because I really locked in on the NBA this season. But as a massive Duke fan, I'm always watching the ACC games, and I'm always just keeping my eye on national games in general. So I know for sure at the top, I think honestly, when you're talking about that top 5 type prospects, all of those guys are going to be great. From what I've seen with both of the Thompson twins, they look awesome. I think Brandon Miller, you literally have to take him 2 or 3. He's so versatile. Reminds me of a young Paul George in a lot of ways. But guys I like, I would say Jarace Walker from Houston.
You took my guy.
I'm
glad you pointed him out. I'm going to let you talk on that one.
Very tough guy. I'll give you some space on him too, because for me, it's really not anything you could say for him in terms of stats or anything specific. I think he's like 6'7", 6'8". It's really just the heart. Watching that Houston team, they defended the hell out of every team they played against. And a big part of it was he's a 6'7", 6'8" guy who's really light on his feet. He can block shots. He averaged over a block a game, hard-nosed rebounder, just willing to do everything you need to win. One of those guys, a power forward, I feel like you plug in and play on the right team. And, he could maybe even play in a playoff rotation. He's maybe not going to score as much, and you're going to need to work pretty much all season on him hitting open threes. But if you're just talking about making passes on the short roll, playing defense, giving heart, Jarace Walker is a great guy. All of the Duke guys who are big names are really interesting just because they had kind of a down year and a lot of injuries. Derek Lively is, I believe, measured around like 7 feet or 7'1". He's just massive, good defensive presence that didn't play a ton. Dariq Whitehead was one of the top high school players in the country, had a big foot injury, I believe, shot really well from the three-point line for a guy who was known as a slasher. And a big part of that was he put on some weight and wasn't as explosive as he was before. I believe the Atlanta Hawks with AJ Griffin, it's a similar situation where I would say I think he may get to a team that's already kind of good. And we're going to be shocked when Dariq Whitehead's making some big shots for like a team that's like a playoff caliber team. But the main guy I really want to mention, I don't know why I waited so long to get to him, Grady Dick from Kansas. Mm-hmm. He's in no way exactly. You said shooter. He's not just a shooter. He can get to the rim a little. He's not a high free throw guy. I think he only averaged like 2 or 3 a game, but he can make them. Not an amazing passer either, but good rebounder for his position. He's a guy who was kind of playing the 2-3 and got about 5 boards a game. But the main position is, you said it, he's a shooter. I think he measures at 6'8" in shoes. So you're talking about a guy you can play at the 2 guard spot, and he's 6'8". So, we don't know how the league's going to go and how the draft's going to go. But just for example's sake, I was talking about Scoot playing in Charlotte. If you have Scoot and LaMelo, Grady Dick is taller than both of those guys. So chasing him around screens is going to be work for most guys. And it's similar to Duncan Robinson, where you combine that height with a great release. He can play on whether you put him on a lottery team that needs some shooting like Orlando, or you put him on a team that's already kind of good and is just trying to fill out the roster like New Orleans, or even the Lakers, putting Grady Dick next to LeBron James. I think he'll thrive in those situations. So I'm interested to see where he goes, because this isn't a great draft, I would say, after the top 7 or 5 is the consensus. So Grady Dick could go anywhere from as high as like 7 or 8 around that Indiana-Washington range, or he could go at the back of the lottery, end of the first round. It just really depends what teams are looking for.
Yeah, Grady Dick, I seen a few of his highlights. I know he's a top tier shooter, and he could definitely help a team like Orlando, who has a lot of athletes that are proven playmakers and shot creators, and all he got to do is pretty much just chill, play like good health side defense every once in a while. And I that would be a nice fit for him. But Jarris Walker, though, you took the name out of my mouth, man. Like I like him. I was
going to say, I hate agitating Bulls fans more than I already do. But before you go in on Walker, I did want to say I found it really funny. You mentioned how Grady Dick would be a good fit in Orlando. And I had mentioned Orlando because, it's pretty obvious with their team. They could use some 3-point shooting. But Tankathon, actually, funny enough, has Orlando with the 11th pick. That is the Bulls pick they are giving to Orlando, drafting Grady Dick. Wow. And it is really sad because, again, Grady Dick, I think he's a great player. Obviously, he's not someone who's making anyone a championship contender, but I just do think it's pretty funny that that's where he's projected to go, considering if the Bulls had that pick at 11, I completely would not hate them being able to land Grady Dick. A team that is last in the league in 3-point attempts and 3-point makes, being able to add a 40% 3-point shooter, one of the best in college, would have been great, but I'm not one to cry over spilled milk. So I just wanted to mention that was kind of funny.
Me and Josh talked about the Bulls a lot during the early days of Open Run. We were kicking off this show, and that was one of the biggest issues. Grady Dick definitely would help this Bulls squad if he was available to them. And had they not made that trade to land Nikola Vucevic a couple years ago, which Orlando has turned into a treasure of riches, from Wendell Carter Jr. to Franz Wagner, and the list goes on and remains to be continued based off of what they'll do with these picks on Thursday night. But yeah, Jarris Walker, I like him a lot. He's a guy who can really thrive in the league right away, as you said, with his skill set. He's a solid 2-way player, strong defense on and off the ball, mobile enough to check a center or guard or wing if you need him to. And he utilized his size very well when it came to impacting things as a help side defender too. Well, I don't think he really got enough credit for that. I wouldn't be shocked to see him get a lot of minutes as a small ball 5. And if he falls anywhere lower than like 7th, if the Dallas Mavericks see him on the board at 10, I feel like that's the guy for them. A team like the Detroit Pistons, even though they have a slew of bigs, I would be curious to see him alongside of a Jalen Duren and, seeing that pairing, because he can help them as well there. And yeah, he's a guy that he still has to work on his offensive game a little bit when it comes to creating for himself off the dribble. But yeah, he's a very solid passer, and he could be a weapon beside an elite guard like a Luka Doncic, taking some pressure off of him as a secondary playmaker in the offense. Nice rim runner, just very athletic, man. And really one of those guys who I think you won't see his impact on the stat sheet, but when you watch the games, you will feel it. And Taylor Hendricks is another guy, keeping in the American Conference with Central Florida. He's an intriguing prospect to me. You talking about a guy that's around 6'9", 213, has great size, can shoot the rock. He's projected as like a high-level 3-point shooter, has deep range, makes it look easy, and he can also handle it off the dribble. He's an above-the-rim player, kind of in that Paul George mode, but he needs a little bit of work, and he could guard 3 through 5, but kind of reminds me a little bit of like Jeremy Grant in some areas. So I'm curious to see where he lands as well. And those are really like the two main prospects that stand out to me. But what teams inside the lottery are you most eager to see how they go about conducting their business on draft night? I know we talked about Charlotte at number 2, but you got a Houston Rockets team that has a top 5 pick. You got the Dallas Mavericks at number 10. What teams are you all looking forward to see how they go about, they draft process, Michael?
I think at this point, it's gonna be sort of the teams that have to pick a direction, so to speak. I think the big ones are gonna be, now you said still within the lottery, right?
Yeah, within the lottery.
Yeah, so still within the lottery. I mean, literally, if we just want to go top to bottom, because I mean, obviously, San Antonio, Charlotte, we know both those teams are rebuilding teams that are just trying to land franchise pieces. Portland is where the draft, really starts. It seems like indications have come out that despite the obvious pressure from Lillard to win, seems like they're going to make the pick and sort of, play a little game of chicken with Lillard. And, let's just say they get Brandon Miller. He is a helpful player. He'll be a good player. I think they'll say, what do you want to do? And I think Lillard's pretty content with finishing his career at Portland. So even if they don't do anything right away and just ride it out for a while, I think Portland is where it starts getting interesting. So that's where it starts getting cool for me, because they're kind of going to set the direction. Houston could be, if they were interested in making some massive move, because all the chatter has been they want to get veterans and become a win now team with Udoka there. I still expect them to make the pick. So after Portland, I would say Washington is where the intrigue really, really starts for me at 8. Obviously, you make this massive Bradley Beal trade. You have the trade update today to where details are coming out. You're giving away more young players that are going to fill out the Phoenix bench. They threw in Jordan Goodwin, who was a young athletic player who was pretty good at open threes, not good at contested, but a good role player. They threw in Isaiah Todd, someone I was familiar with, who was a youngster who played in the G League, didn't play for the NBA team at all, was in the G League still, but just a young guy who maybe could have some potential. So Washington sort of cleared out the decks here. I can't see Kuzma wanting to stay there unless they commit money to him, which I can't see that now. Porzingis might be someone they give money just to trade later on. So what I'm saying is it seems like Washington just cleared the decks, basically. So I'm interested in what they do at 8, because Taylor Hendricks and some of the guys we were sort of talking about, like Walker, I don't think they're the guys that Washington can afford to take. I think they have to take a massive swing. I'm not really sure what that is, but when you empty out the decks like this, I think you got to take someone where it's a massive bet, but you're going to let them have the ball and sort of just let them take over the Washington Wizards and see what happens there. Just off the top of my head, a couple guys that would maybe fit that. There's a guy who's on Wembanyama's team. I believe it's Kubalali. I don't want to mispronounce that, but he's a young player who's, I think he's 18 years old right now, 6'8", very explosive athlete. Again, because a lot of guys scouted Wembanyama so much, they've seen him play. Outside of him, a guy that maybe a lot of people aren't talking about, but Kobe Buffkin. He was a guard at Michigan, was a guy who was just interesting, very good scorer, very crafty. 8 would be, I think, a tremendous, maybe not tremendous, but 8 would be a bit of an overdraft for him. But again, Washington is in the spot where if they really believed in him for some reason, I had no problem with, Washington taking him and saying, we're just going to let him take 20 shots a game and see what happens. They just need to take a home run swing. So really, those are the teams that are most interesting to me, would be Portland and Washington. Outside of someone like Dallas, who I expect to trade the pick, but they also could, be interesting and make a selection there as well.
Yeah, what teams are you interested to see how they go about operating and conducting business, Josh?
Obviously, he mentioned the big ones. Portland is obviously the biggest one for me. I would like to see what New Orleans is going to do, though, because if they are that hell-bent on trying to get rid of Zion, you never know what picks become available for them, and to New Orleans' credit, they've drafted pretty well. So I want to see what New Orleans is going to do with that. Obviously, we talk about Dallas and what Houston might do. Indiana's looking to trade their 7th pick, so I want to see what direction they want to go with that. But of course, it's Portland. Portland is the biggest draw of all this, and I do believe that if they were to have the 3 pick, and they were able to, if they can't get a Brandon Miller, they get a Scoot Henderson per se. I think that actually speeds up the process for Dame to go. And it also allows Portland to be comfortable with that, knowing they got a solidified star or budding star in this draft process that can kind of just take over those reins. But it's going to be interesting either way with any of those teams, but for sure, Portland, New Orleans, I mentioned, to see what they're going to do. And if the rumors are true with Charlotte, really looking into New Orleans and getting Zion, that's going to speed up the rankings too. So I'm definitely interested to see what those teams are going to do.
I'm glad you bring up New Orleans, because Michael brought up a question that I was thinking about just throwing on you guys right away. He said he wouldn't trade Zion. I agree 100%. If I was David Griffin and that New Orleans front office, I would not trade Zion Williamson right now. I would give this at least a year or two before I even make that assessment, especially after signing him to a max deal and knowing that the Pelicans were 2nd in the West prior to him going down with his injury at the turn of the new year early on in the NBA season. Should the Pelicans, in your eyes, Josh, trade Zion Williams?
From a talent perspective, no. It just doesn't make sense to me. Because as much as Zion Williamson hasn't been on the court, you can see the difference as to what he is to when he is. The Pelicans are a way better team with a better chance of winning when you have that dominant of a force on the floor. Now, granted, if you can stay healthy, cool. Then, that would be a plus for the Pelicans. But I think the Pelicans are showing fatigue in dealing with Zion because of the outside noise, because of the fact that he can barely stay healthy, and because of obvious reports that have been very known to the public regarding his relationship with not just players on the team, but the front office, as well as the training staff, the medical staff. There's a lot of disconnects in New Orleans when it comes to Zion and the Pelicans. So you try to make that talent work, but if the Pelicans are so fatigued in dealing with someone like Zion in the situations that he's in, and it makes more sense for these rumors to come out and say, hey, we are willing to let him go. But if I was New Orleans, I wouldn't trade him to Charlotte. I would actually look at trading him to potentially Portland. You get the 3rd pick, you can get Scoot Henderson as your solidified point guard. You move CJ McCollum to the 2. You got BI, you can move him to the 3. That's actually a pretty decent perimeter backcourt that, could honestly help a little bit in staying afloat with the roster that they do have. Yes, it's going to be hard to replace Zion and what he brings to the table, especially in that 4 or 5 position. But Scoot in the backcourt with BI and CJ McCollum, and as a veteran presence that he is, that's not a bad backcourt to go forward in the West, and especially if you have enough space to fill in the voids, not just on your bench, but from your big man department as well.
Yeah, especially if they can stay healthy. And Trey Murphy, they must really believe in him. They have to. I think he's one of the top young players in the league. I don't think he gets enough credit. Everyone talks about Mikal Bridges, and rightfully so, but this guy is coming. And I think a lot of people need to know, but whenever I see Zion Williamson's name in trade rumors, it really lets me know that they must really believe in Trey Murphy III, man, because ain't no way I'm making that move personally. Even though I like Trey Murphy III, ain't no way I'm trading Zion right now. I think he's very valuable to that New Orleans market. And I think if he can just stay healthy and get his diet right a little bit, he can take off and really be a top 10 player in this league, which he has shown the ability to do in the minutes and moments in which he's healthy. But I want to move into free agency as we seek to close up the show. Warriors 4-time NBA All-Star forward Draymond Green declined his $27.5 million player option for the 23-24 season to enter unrestricted free agency. Rich Paul of Clutch Sport, Green's agent, said the Woj of ESPN, we will continue to talk to Golden State and explore all options. Do you guys see Draymond Green staying in Golden State? And if not, which teams do you believe are the top landing spots for the 33-year-old power forward? I'll start with you on this one, Michael.
Yeah, so my initial reaction or at least my initial thoughts, I would say, on the whole Draymond situation was when Golden State had Bob Myers sort of step down there and go out of the picture. I said, wow, he really doesn't want to deal with these Draymond negotiations because it's going to be a tough situation. You know, you got the end of the dynasty, or not the end of the dynasty, but one of the key figures of the dynasty, obviously, at the end of his deal. And you're not going to be able to sort of use conventional wisdom or conventional stats when you're negotiating with Draymond Green, a guy who's the heart and soul pretty much of your championship teams, obviously, outside of Steph here. So I think he's going to stay in Golden State just because Draymond Green, you know, I'm sure he wants the max amount of money. I'm not sure if Golden State has some hard stance against giving it to him, but I think they're just in a situation where they need Draymond as much as he needs the Warriors. And it'll just make sense for both parties, similar to the Bulls and Vucevic, to sort of just suck it up and come to an agreement, even if both sides lose out a little bit in terms of length or money. You know, maybe Draymond doesn't get max money, but maybe he gets 4 years instead of 3 years, something along those lines. But I think he'll end up in Golden State. If for some reason he wasn't to come back in Golden State, or things blew up and they look to sign and trade him, remove him, Draymond's such a unique player. It's really hard to imagine him anywhere that isn't trying to compete for a championship team that could just really use a forward. So the only really spot I could see is like maybe if Dallas could somehow finagle some sort of cap space. I'm not sure if Dallas would be able to do it, but just having a defensive presence, somebody who's going to be serious about everything when you have Kyrie and Luka, a defensive guy to balance that out, makes sense. And then not a championship team, but again, Houston is a team that seems like unlimited money to spend, and they're committed to bringing in veterans. If his whole thing is just getting the most money that he can, Houston may be one of those options where I have no idea what the rest of that team is going to look like, but at the very least, they have an interesting center right now who's quite good in Şengün, and Draymond would have some scoring guards to pass to, and that's even before you get to the fact that this team is assumed to get James Harden. So Houston would be really one of the big teams to look for, I would say, assuming he doesn't go back to Golden State.
I never thought about him going to Houston, but now that you bring that up and knowing how much they would value a veteran in that locker room, he would be an invaluable presence there. I can tell you that much, especially with Ime Udoka at the forefront as the new head coach in H-Town under GM Rafael Stone. What about you, Josh? You see him staying in Golden State? Or if not, where do you think his top landing spots could be? Because I agree with Michael. You know, Draymond Green doesn't strike me as the type of guy that's not trying to make it to June. I think that's his aspiration each and every year. He's a winning player, always has been from the time he entered the league coming out of Michigan State.
Yeah, I see him staying. When you talk about obviously championship winning, he's done it with arguably the greatest player of the generation. Like when you really think about it, no one is able to do it in a way that Steph Curry plays and done. And, you know, to have a sidekick who shoots the balls effectively, almost as effectively from a top tier perspective as Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, you know, it's just an ideal situation, not just from him winning championships, but from a legacy perspective. It's hard to see me put Draymond in a situation that doesn't equate to him playing with that type of talent all the time, especially when it's been your career. You've won 4 championships with them and been to at least 6 NBA finals. You know, that's tough to leave. So I think, you know, he's going to stay. I think he's going to get a deal that equates to the timeline of when Steph Curry contracts ends. So that way, once Curry's contract ends, depending on what they do, the Warriors will literally have free reign to complete with everybody from that core. And I do believe that, you know, he's obviously going to be a team-friendly situation, because I think his ultimate goal is to retire with the players that he came in the group with and won success with. And he spoke about that a lot on his podcast as well. So I think he is going to stay. If for some reason things do go south, 2 teams that really cut on my mind. I think his relationship with LeBron James plays a huge role in things. So I think he would definitely consider really going to the Lakers. trying to help them win. I think that could be beneficial for them considering what's been going on with Anthony Davis. You can really give Anthony Davis not just some advice and but business on the court, holding him accountable, etc. But the dark horse team, honestly, is Portland. If they keep Damian Lillard, putting Draymond with Damian Lillard, which is not necessarily Steph Curry, but can be close to it. You talk about the range, and the offensive style that Damian Lillard brings to the table, and you still got Anthony Simons on the other wing with Shaden Sharp. If they continue to develop on the offensive end, I can see him doing some damage with them. And he does have a relationship with Damian Lillard as well. So I think those things can play a huge factor in the role if Damian Lillard is choosing to stay. And obviously Portland has to figure out what they're going to do with the likes of Jeremy Grant, etc. But I would not be surprised if Portland does give him a call, bearing that nothing happens to Damian Lillard past draft night as far as the trade perspective is going.
Yeah, new Warriors GM Mike Dunleavy said at his introductory news conference on Monday that we really want Draymond back. What he means in terms of this organization and this team winning at the highest level, we feel like we have to have him. Want to move on and discuss Toronto Raptors all-star guard Fred VanVleet, who declined his $22.8 million player option for the 23-24 season to join the free agency market. He has not ruled out negotiating a return to Toronto on a new deal, but he's expected to have a long list of suitors, being one of the more prominent free agents on the market per ESPN's Woj. Could make $30 million a year, they saying, if he gets a new deal. Where do you think would be his more ideal, or his best landed spots going into free agency should he seek to leave north of the border?
Man, that's tough because Fred VanVleet is really a versatile point guard that can fit in any offense. But if money was never a factor, for me, I would love to see him obviously here in Chicago. Him being a point guard for the Bulls, because he can assist, but he can play make and bring low turnover basketball as well as youth to this team, man, that could really play with the best of the best. And the Bulls desperately need a point guard. So with him being a homegrown kid, growing up in Rockford,
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, Quad City native.
Yeah, why not, man? To me, it makes a ton of sense if money was never an issue. The other team I would love to see him with is Phoenix. I would love to see him with that backcourt, because what makes Fred VanVleet so deadly is he doesn't need the ball to be effective. Yes, he can facilitate offense, score when necessary, and with that gift, he can really score at a high level and a high clip if he really wants to. But it's an additional option for Phoenix or a team like that has a lot of high quality scoring on their team. It's just the extra icing on the cake. And, knowing the fact that he is the champion, he knows what it takes to win, putting him in a situation like that will be ideal. I also think Philadelphia will be nice, considering that if they don't bring back James Harden, his relationship with Nick Nurse is already there, and you put him with the best big man in the league in Joel Embiid. That's a pretty nice combination as well. But it's hard for me to say where he's exactly going to go, because obviously money plays a role in this. And I still think with all that considering, Philadelphia may be the most ideal spot for him. For me personally, I think he should go. But it would be awesome to have a homecoming with him coming to Chicago, man. I think that would be nice.
He has a lot of places where he could fit. I could see Philadelphia. Didn't think about the Bulls, but maybe if the Bulls are willing to make some moves and create some willing and dealing, you could be in the Fred VanVleet sweepstakes. You easily could. It's a lot of teams that could use him. A lot of teams. What are your thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, Fred VanVleet, as far as when you talk about the little guards, as they call them, the smaller guys, he's one of the best up there. He's durable, at least, when you're talking about someone being that height. Hasn't played all 82 in his career, but 65 2 years ago, 69 this year. So he's going to play at least the majority of your games there. For Fred, in terms of fit, in my head, starting this offseason, I was thinking just going back to Toronto, being wherever you're comfortable is the best move for him, just staying where he's at. When they went with the head coach that they went with, I was shocked. They said that, they were, I didn't remember the exact quote, but it was maybe open to winning, open to rebuilding, sort of open to everything. The fact that they chose an inexperienced coach, a first timer, did indicate to me that it seems like they're going to rebuild. But that would take a considerable amount of wheeling and dealing because they have a lot of good players under contract or coming up here. So I think with them making that move towards the head coach, he is more likely to leave now. I don't think Fred VanVleet would consider the Texas teams, but I have to mention them for everyone just because they have a lot of money and they seem like they're going to try to get every free agent. Houston and San Antonio, I'm sure, would love to have VanVleet. Spurs, same thing, another point guard for Wembanyama. Houston, if they're trying to get veterans to become a win-now team. But the team I think Fred VanVleet should go to, especially if he's leaving Toronto, is the Utah Jazz. They'll have a decent amount of cap space. I believe Jordan Clarkson has a player option. So
yes, he does.
Depending on if he stays or leaves, it's going to affect if they have a lot or still a decent amount. But I think if Clarkson stays, they still have well over 20-something million cap space. So Fred VanVleet, he didn't have a great shooting year this year. I think he shot like 34% from three, which is well below his usual level. He's usually like a 37% guy. But he still shot, I think, just under 9 threes a game. So he's firing away from three-point line every night. Utah was top 5 in three-point attempts per game. I think they took just under like 38 threes a night. So I think you put him in Utah, it's a perfect fit. Him and Lauri Markkanen are just going to bomb away from three-point range and really challenge and test your defense. And I think Utah is one of the teams like Toronto that has the size to make VanVleet work on defense because he's a good defender and gives effort. But even if he's beat off the dribble, they have Walker Kessler on the back line, who was just a massive defender to clean up your mistakes on the perimeter.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Walker Kessler. That was a guy that I honestly had on my radar for the Bulls last year during the draft, alongside of Mark Williams. I was a huge fan of Walker Kessler coming out, and I think he's going to be a nice defensive anchor in Salt Lake City for the next several seasons if he's able to stay healthy. I never thought about Fred VanVleet in Utah before you mentioned that, but that would be a hell of a fit, knowing that they need a traditional point guard who will be able to help them get into their sets besides a Lauri Markkanen and a Walker Kessler over there. And then you got Ochai Agbaji as well, who's a solid player, catch and shoot option and a defensive wing. The guys worked extensively with Damian Lillard in off seasons past. So yeah, Utah would be a very nice destination. Any team that's young, I think, with some size would be interesting. I thought about Orlando. Houston is another place, as you brought up. I think it would be nice as long as they didn't have to overpay for him and showing those young guys how to work and win over there. But he has an assortment of options, in my opinion, and he can seek to go wherever he wants. It's just all about the dollars and the figures at the end of the day. But that concludes this week's edition of Open Run. Definitely want to thank our special guest, Michael Walton II, for coming on. Let us know where we can check you out, man, and your work.
Yeah, definitely. The main thing really, man, is just for people to follow me on Twitter at ZenMasterMike. ZenMasterMike, or you could just look up my name, Michael Walton. Has 2 capital I's after Walton. That's for Michael Walton II, in case people are wondering. But yeah, follow me on Twitter. Check out work. Bulls Confidential is our Bulls website. It's bullsconf.com. But right now, we've just been slowly dripping out player reviews, starting with the bench guys. So Derek Jones and Drummond are up right now. But yeah, just shouting out everybody, shouting out the bigs and all the other guys out there doing great work to people at CHGO Sports. My only Bulls point is fans will be disappointed when they bring everyone back, but I really believe in Kobe White. I really believe in Kobe White as a starting point guard. People forget the last time he was a starter for the Bulls, he averaged 15 points a game. So I think given Kobe, now that he improved a little bit on defense and decision-making, I think it's time to let Kobe and Zach cook and just, see what you have there for a little bit. So Kobe and Patrick Williams starting a lot and playing a lot of minutes is my solution for the Bulls sort of getting out of this mess. Just Kobe White and Patrick Williams becoming great players, And I think Bulls fans will be a lot happier if you really try to, I won't tell anybody how to be a fan how you want. And we're going to complain because we should, but focus on the young players getting better, because that's truly right now the only way the Bulls are going to get out of this situation is the young guys taking a step up. So, yeah, that's all I want to say for Bulls fans there.
Yeah, I agree. They definitely got to get a young guy some minutes. Patrick Williams is definitely one of those guys who's on the last year of his rookie deal. And you need to see whether or not he's an extension-worthy player, which I believe he is, but I think he's going to need a little bit of the ball in his hands way more often than what he's had. He's been very subservient, and I think a lot of that's due to playing with some all-star vets like DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine beside him. But next year, yeah, I definitely want to see the ball in his hands some more so he can show what he's capable of doing, because I think he's a wing that has some sticking power in this league for a long time. I'm not going to say he's a perennial all-star, but I think he's a serviceable player that could contribute to a winning ball club if you build around him in the right manner.
And I also wanted to shout out really quick a little used guy in Dalen Terry. Dalen Terry didn't play at all, has a lot of playmaking chops. I've wrote about him. Again, that's why you got to follow me at Zen Master Mike. Great article from back in the day about Dalen Terry's playmaking skills. He's a guy who could be your point guard. He could be your Lonzo Ball fill-in. You just never know because Billy wasn't ready to give him the leash yet. So really anybody who is a young player on a good deal needs to get a bump up in minutes this year for sure.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you on that. Anything you got to plug, Josh, before we go?
Bulldozed with the bigs. Shout out to T and G, to Terrence and Gino, and Drew, obviously, with one of the big time upcoming home guys, man. We're doing our thing with Bulldoze. We will be at the draft. I will be at the draft night at Advocate Center with everybody. So obviously stay tuned for all draft updates. Interested to see what the Bulls are going to do this year, knowing that they have no picks at all for this draft. So we'll see what's going to happen.
Yeah, they definitely got their work cut out, but definitely make sure to check out Josh's content, Hit the Bigs, check out Michael's content, Chicago Bulls Confidential. Make sure to check out all the shows we got here at War Media, such as the At Bat Podcast with Saul Rodriguez, Miles Porter. Might see a familiar face on there from time to time. Talk about the state of affairs on baseball, on the north side, south side, as well as the rest of the MLB. For myself, Gabriel Wilkins, our special guest, Michael Walton, and my co-host, Josh Hicks. So long, everybody.